Cold cases, unsolved crime cases, and unsolved disappearances are all things that I love to explore. And I know you do too, you intriguing and intellectually minded person. Today, we're diving into three of America's most chilling and forgotten cold cases that'll make your true crime-loving brain cells do a little dance. And if you're already feeling those goosebumps, smash that like button and join our detective family by subscribing. Let's start with a case that'll make you think twice about sleeping tonight. The infamous Villisca Axe Murders of 1912. And trust me, this one's so bizarre, it makes modern horror movies look like children's bedtime stories. Picture this. June 10th, 1912, in the peaceful town of Villisca, Iowa. A town so quiet. The most exciting thing that usually happened was watching paint dry. Well, that was about to change dramatically. The Moore family, Josiah, his wife Sarah, and their 4 children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, had just returned from a church event. They also had 2 guests staying over, Lena and Ina Stillinger. Little did they know, this would be their last night alive. And no, this isn't the start of a horror movie, though it might sound like one. Between midnight and 5 a.m., while the town slept, an unknown killer or killers entered the Moore house. Here's where it gets really disturbing, folks. The perpetrator methodically went through the house, covering every mirror and glass window with clothing or bedsheets. Talk about being camera shy, am I right? Though this is definitely not the time for selfies. If you're enjoying this spine-chilling tale so far, don't forget to hit that like button. Your support helps us bring more of these fascinating cold cases to light. The killer then took an axe. Yes, the Moore's own axe from their backyard, and systematically murdered all 8 people in the house. Each victim was struck multiple times in the head while they slept. The axe was later found in the guest room, wiped clean of fingerprints. Whoever did this clearly watched too many crime documentaries. Except those didn't exist in 1912. The bodies weren't discovered until the following morning when Mary Peckham, a neighbor, noticed something unusual. The Moore family was known for their strict morning routine, but on that day, no smoke was coming from their chimney. No lights were on. No movement. After trying to reach the family and getting no response, she called Josiah Moore's brother Ross. Ross and another local resident forced their way in through the door and discovered a scene so horrific that it would haunt Villisca for generations. I'd share more details, but we're trying to keep this PG-13, folks. The investigation that followed was, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly CSI material. The crime scene was contaminated by dozens of curious townspeople who walked through the house before law enforcement could properly investigate. Seriously, people of 1912, haven't you heard of crime scene preservation? Oh, wait. If you're finding this fascinating, make sure to subscribe. We've got 2 more incredibly bizarre cases coming up that'll blow your mind. Several suspects emerged over the years. The primary one was Reverend George Kelly, a traveling preacher known for his peculiar behavior. He actually confessed to the murders in 1917, but later recanted, claiming his confession was coerced. Plot twist. Another suspect was Frank F. Jones, a prominent Villisca resident, and Josiah Moore's former employer. Some believe he orchestrated the murders due to business rivalries and alleged personal grievances. Business competition in 1912 was apparently no joke. Then there was Henry Lee Moore, no relation to the victims, a serial killer who committed similar axe murders across the Midwest. However, none of these leads ever produced enough evidence for a conviction. The Villisca Axe Murder House still stands today, considered one of America's most haunted locations. Paranormal investigators and curious tourists regularly visit, though I'd suggest maybe doing a virtual tour instead. You know, just to be safe. Would you believe this is just the first of our 3 forgotten cold cases? If you're already hooked and slightly terrified, stick around. Hit that like button and subscribe because up next, we're diving into the mysterious case of the Grimes sisters. Trust me, it's another wild ride through American crime history that'll have you sleeping with the lights on. Now, let's travel forward in time to Chicago, December 28th, 1956. Don't worry, our time machine is perfectly safe. Unlike this next story, two sisters, Barbara, 15, and Patricia Grimes, 13, were about to become part of one of Chicago's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Picture this. It's a cold winter evening, and the Grimes sisters are absolutely ecstatic. Why? Because Elvis Presley's Love Me Tender is playing at the Brighton Theater. Yes, folks, this was the 1950s equivalent of Taylor Swift concert fever. The girls, like many teenagers of their time, were huge Elvis fans. So huge, in fact, that this would be Barbara's 50th time seeing the movie. And you thought your Netflix binge watching was excessive. The sisters left their home at 2911 South Damon Avenue around 7:30 p.m. with their mother, Loretta, giving them strict instructions to return by midnight. But as we all know in true crime stories, when someone says be home by midnight, things rarely go as planned. When the girls didn't return home, Loretta wasn't immediately worried. After all, they'd sometimes stay over at their older sister's house. But when morning came and there was still no sign of them, panic set in. And this was way before cell phones, so no Find My iPhone to help locate them. The disappearance sparked one of Chicago's largest manhunts. Newspapers plastered the girls' photos everywhere, and Elvis himself even made a public plea for the sisters to return home if they had run away. Imagine getting a personal message from the king himself, though unfortunately, this wasn't a runaway case. If you're finding this case intriguing, don't forget to subscribe. We've got more mind-bending mysteries coming up. Then came January 22nd, 1957, a date that would forever haunt Chicago. Leonard Prescott, a construction worker, was driving along German Church Road near Willow Springs when he spotted what he thought were mannequins behind a guardrail. Spoiler alert, they weren't mannequins, and this is where our story takes an even darker turn. The bodies of Barbara and Patricia were found nude, frozen, and positioned in a way that suggested they'd been thrown from a car. Their bodies showed signs of various injuries, though the exact cause of death was difficult to determine due to the frozen condition. The 1950s forensic capabilities were about as sophisticated as a flip phone in today's world. Here's where things get even more bizarre. The girls' bodies showed evidence they'd been alive for several days after their disappearance. Their stomachs contained partially digested hot dogs and French fries, suggesting they'd been fed shortly before their deaths. This detail would haunt investigators for decades. The investigation produced several suspects, each more intriguing than the last. First was Edward Benny Bedwell, a dishwasher who confessed to the murders after a marathon 42-hour interrogation. Because nothing says reliable confession like sleep deprivation, right? His confession was later proved false, and he was released. Then there was Walter Krantz, a security guard who allegedly bragged about killing the sisters. But like many leads in this case, it led nowhere. Seriously, what is it with people falsely confessing to murders? It's not exactly a great conversation starter. Quick pause. If these twists and turns are making your detective senses tingle, hit that like button. Your engagement helps us bring more fascinating cold cases to light. One of the most interesting theories involved a man named Charles Leroy Melquist, who was convicted of murdering another teenage girl just a year after the Grimes sisters' deaths. The similarities between the cases were striking, but police could never definitively connect him to the Grimes murders. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this case was its impact on Chicago's culture. It marked the end of an era where parents felt safe letting their children travel the city alone. The case transformed Chicago's perception of safety and innocence, much like the way true crime podcasts are changing how we view our neighborhoods today. Except now we're all just paranoid with smartphones. The Grimes sisters case remains unsolved, with the original case files mysteriously disappearing from the Cook County State's Attorney's office in the 1980s. Because apparently, keeping track of crucial evidence wasn't a priority back then. Esticaron, True Crime Aficionados. Our third case about the mysterious murder of Mary Rogers is coming up next, and trust me, it's so bizarre that Edgar Allan Poe himself wrote about it. Don't forget to subscribe to catch it. If you've made it this far without getting completely spooked, congratulations. You're officially a true crime champion. And speaking of champions, be one by hitting that subscribe button if you haven't already. Now, let's hop into our time machine again and travel way back to 1841 New York City. Don't worry about bringing your smartphone. They didn't have Instagram back then anyway. We're about to uncover the story of the beautiful cigar girl, Mary Cecilia Rogers. Before we dive in, imagine being so famous that Edgar Allan Poe writes a story about your murder. That's exactly what happened with Mary Rogers. Talk about posthumous fame, though I'm sure she would have preferred a different claim to fame. Quick like button reminder. If you're enjoying this historical true crime journey, show some love. Mary Rogers wasn't your average 20-year-old in 1841 Manhattan, working at John Anderson's tobacco shop. She was essentially the 19th century equivalent of a social media influencer. Instead of Instagram followers, she had literary giants and journalists falling over themselves just to buy cigars from her. Her beauty was so renowned that newspapers regularly mentioned her, and famous writers like Washington Irving would visit the shop just to catch a glimpse of her. 19th century simping at its finest, folks. But on July 25, 1841, Mary told her fiancé, Daniel Payne, and her landlord that she was going to visit her aunt. Instead, she disappeared. Pro tip: if someone in a true crime story says they're visiting their aunt, they probably aren't visiting their aunt. 3 days later, and here's where it gets really dark, her body was found floating in the Hudson River near Hoboken, New Jersey. If you're eating while watching this, maybe take a break for this part. The discovery shocked the city to its core. Her body showed signs of brutal treatment, with evidence suggesting she had been assaulted and strangled. The newspapers went absolutely wild. Remember, this was 1841, no television, no radio, no TikTok. Newspapers were the only source of entertainment, and boy, did they milk this story. Think of it as the first true crime sensation, minus the podcast merch. If these historical twists are making your detective brain work overtime, don't forget to subscribe. We've got more fascinating cases in our upcoming videos. The investigation was, well, let's just say it wouldn't win any awards by today's standards. Multiple theories emerged, each more sensational than the last. Some suggested it was a gang murder. Others claimed it was a botched abortion gone wrong. And some even proposed it was an elaborate hoax. Conspiracy theories aren't just a modern invention, folks. One prime suspect was her fiancé, Daniel Payne. Because in true crime, it's always a fiancé. Except when it isn't. Payne was so distraught over Mary's death that he eventually committed suicide in 1841, leaving a note that read, "Here I am on the spot. God forgive me for my misspent life." Talk about cryptic last words. The case became so famous that Edgar Allan Poe used it as the basis for his detective story, The Mystery of Marie Roget. When a gothic horror writer thinks your case is dark enough to adapt, you know it's serious. Here's where it gets even more interesting. John Anderson, Mary's employer, was suspected of having more than just a professional interest in her. Some theories suggested he might have been involved in her death, especially after he became extremely wealthy and moved to Paris. Nothing says, "I'm innocent," like fleeing to another continent, right? Another fascinating suspect was a gang known as the Sixpenny Gang. They were known for terrorizing the area where Mary's body was found. However, like every other lead in this case, this theory led to a dead end. The gang apparently had a better alibi than their cheap name would suggest. The most controversial theory suggested that Mary's death was connected to a failed abortion attempt. This theory gained traction when a local woman named Madame Resdell, known for providing such services, was mentioned in connection with the case. This was the 1840s version of a viral conspiracy theory. Hit that like button if you're still with me, because this next part is wild. The case took another bizarre turn when Mary's mother, Phoebe, began acting strangely after her daughter's death. She claimed to have evidence about the murder, but never revealed it. She died taking whatever secrets she knew to her grave. Talk about a plot twist. The impact of Mary Rogers' murder on American society was profound. It exposed the inadequacies of early American law enforcement and inspired the creation of the first municipal police force in New York City. So, in a way, she accidentally helped create modern policing. The case remains unsolved to this day, joining our previous two cases in the vast archive of America's most intriguing cold cases. While we may never know what really happened to the beautiful Cigar Girl, her story continues to fascinate true crime enthusiasts almost 2 centuries later. And there you have it, folks. 3 of America's most fascinating forgotten cold cases. If you've enjoyed this journey through the darker side of American history, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe for more intriguing true crime content.